Did you ever wonder what would have happened if Luffy was trained by these characters? Would he still become a pirate? And most importantly, would he become stronger than in the main story? For example, if Luffy was trained by Dragon, a lot of cool things would happen. Okay, for starters, I'll assume that Luffy has stayed with Dragon ever since he was born, and he has never been sent to 𝗕𝗲 village. This would mean that he never met Garp, Ace, and Shanks, but more importantly, it also means that he never ate his devil fruit. Instead of growing up with mountain bandits, Luffy would grow up surrounded by strong Revolutionary Army members like Ivankov, Kuma, Karasu, and other commanders. Now, traveling with the Revolutionary Army is incredibly dangerous, which is why I believe that Dragon would leave Luffy at their headquarters at 𝗕𝗲𝗄. This should be a safe place for Luffy to grow up and would shelter him from the horrors of the world. While at 𝗕𝗲𝗄, Luffy would learn a lot about how the world works. He would understand that the world government is evil and would overall be much more knowledgeable than in the original story. Also, it's likely that Dragon would appoint someone to train Luffy, most likely Hack, as he is the guy who trains new recruits. Luffy's fighting style would revolve around using Kenpo, or fishman karate techniques, as that's pretty much a standard for Revolutionary Army members. Despite all the changes compared to the original story, I still believe Luffy would develop the same kind of personality. He would be stubborn, hot-headed, and eager to prove himself. He would be mad at Dragon for not letting him join him on any missions and would likely try to escape from 𝗕𝗲𝗄 in order to start his own adventure. Of course, these escape attempts would quickly be stopped by other members who would try to explain to Luffy that he isn't ready yet. It wouldn't be long until Dragon finds Sabo and brings him to the island as well. Luffy and he would quickly become really good friends and would even start training together. After a few years, both Luffy and Sabo would learn Haki and become incredibly strong fighters. Since Luffy is Dragon's son, he will develop Conqueror's Haki as well, which would shock his fellow revolutionaries. After seeing a strong outburst of Conqueror's Haki from Luffy, Dragon would realize that it's finally time he starts giving him more responsibilities and sending him on missions. These missions will give Luffy opportunities to grow as a combatant and tactician. After clashing enough times with the forces of the Marines and the world government, he'll start quickly climbing up the ranks and his strength will grow dramatically. This is why I believe that in this version of the story, Luffy would get promoted to the Chief of Staff, while Sabo would be his right-hand man. This would mean that Luffy would start spending more time with his dad and maybe even going on some missions with him, which would be so cool to see! Eventually, after some time, Blackbeard will start his raid on Revolutionary HQ, same as he did in the original story. So, can Luffy do anything to stop it this time around? You see, it'd be really hard to calculate how strong Luffy would be in this version of the story. However, considering how formidable Sabo was even without Ace's fruit, we can assume he'd be at least strong enough to take on Emperor commanders. This means that Luffy would make a big change on the battlefield, as someone like Jesus Burgess or Von Augur should pose no problem to him. But even with Luffy there, once Blackbeard arrives himself, the Revolutionary Army would stand no chance and would have to retreat. However, soon after that, the biggest challenge so far awaits Luffy: the raid on Marioa. During the raid, Luffy and Sabo would work as a team, and after a brief clash with the admirals, they would successfully infiltrate the castle. It's here that both of them would see Imu, the ruler of the world, for the first time. Now, although it would be absolutely epic to see a battle between Imu and Luffy here, that's completely unrealistic, and it's much more likely that both of them would run for their lives. In the time that follows, Luffy would continue going on missions and battling against both Marines and Cypher Pole agents. It's possible that he would even stumble upon God Knights at some point, but without his Nika powers, it's very unlikely he would be able to match them. So although Luffy would be pretty strong if he was trained by Dragon and would help countless people, he would simply never reach his full potential. Okay, Dragon clearly didn't make Luffy stronger than he is in the main story, but would training under Whitebeard, the strongest man in the world, be any different? In this version, I'll assume that both Ace and Luffy started their pirate journey at the same time, when Ace turned 17. After leaving 𝗕𝗲𝗄 village with Ace and becoming one of the first members of the Spade Pirates, Luffy would quickly realize just how dangerous other pirates are once Ace challenges Whitebeard to a battle. After a brutal defeat, both Ace and Luffy would become a part of Whitebeard's crew. At first, Luffy would be furious over this, but he would quickly realize that Whitebeard and his crew aren't the bad guys. During the next couple of months, Luffy would develop friendships with many characters on the ship and would ask Whitebeard to train him in order to get stronger. Although Whitebeard would refuse at first as he has more important things to do, he would see something in Luffy and eventually agree to show the boy a couple of things. With Whitebeard, this version of Luffy has a high chance of realizing his actual potential, since he can spar with a wide range of very strong characters, like Marco or Vista. Also, with so many Devil Fruit users to interact with, Luffy will learn to bring out the true potential of his fruit. To be honest, I can easily see Luffy developing both Haki and his gears 2 through 4 pretty quickly, making him much stronger than he was in the original story by this time. Same as in the canon version, Blackbeard would soon betray the crew and murder Thatch, which would prompt Ace to go and look for him. However, this time, Luffy would volunteer to accompany Ace and help him catch the traitor. So, can the two brothers together actually catch this guy? Well, although Ace's fight against Blackbeard was pretty close, one important thing to remember is that Blackbeard's crew didn't participate at all. Considering that Luffy is there now, it's likely that Blackbeard's captains would team up and hold Luffy off. This means that Ace would get captured regardless, and Luffy would spend the next few months resenting himself because he wasn't strong enough to help him. Sensing his weaknesses, Luffy would beg for even more training from Whitebeard, and he'd get exactly that. Determined to get one of his sons back, Whitebeard would definitely attack Marineford in this version of the story as well. Now that Luffy knows Haki and has mastery over his Devil Fruit, the war would definitely go much better for the Whitebeard pirates, right? Well, not exactly. You see, at this point in the main story, Luffy had a lot of allies from Impel Down with him, like Ivankov, Crocodile, and Jinbei. Considering Luffy never broke into prison in this version, none of these characters would be there. Even though Luffy is much stronger this time around, he is still nowhere close to admirals in terms of strength, meaning the Whitebeard pirates would eventually lose with both Whitebeard and Ace dying. Devastated by the death of both his mentor and brother, Luffy would break down mid-battle again, but Shanks would arrive just in time to bring an end to the war personally. After the war, Luffy would go through the same depressing phase he went through in the main story, blaming himself for Ace's and Whitebeard's death and for not being strong enough. Thankfully, he would get the help he needs from all of his crewmates and would quickly get back up on his feet. Although most of Whitebeard's territories would be taken by Blackbeard, with Luffy's help in this version, I believe the crew would manage to retain some of them. This also means that the crew wouldn't disband and would probably continue operating under Marco. After helping stabilize the crew, Luffy would have one big decision to make. Would he stay a member of the crew or would he leave? You see, considering both his brother and mentor are now dead, Luffy has no real reason to stay. Also, as Whitebeard pirates aren't interested in seeking One Piece, Luffy's job would mostly consist of protecting their territories, which isn't all that interesting for him. This is why I believe that at this point, Luffy would separate from his friends and would start his own journey to find the One Piece. He would form his own crew, and it's possible that some members of the Whitebeard pirates would join him looking for a good adventure. From here on, Luffy would start searching for road poneglyphs, clashing with both pirates and marines on his journey. Although without his original crew, it would be a lot tougher, and it's very unlikely that he would be able to achieve everything he did in the main story. Before we cover what would have happened if Luffy was trained by Mihawk, let's first see what would have happened if he was trained by his grandpa, Garp. Training under Garp, Luffy would spend his time performing various boring tasks during his early training, similar to what Kobe did. However, as enough time passes, Garp will amp up his training and Luffy will eventually train by punching huge marine battleships. This kind of training will help him develop his Haki from a young age and make him much stronger than he was when he started his journey in the original story. Being raised by Garp as a marine will also result in Luffy becoming a more obedient person who's open to learning from other people and following orders. Considering how Marines are given training to handle both melee and ranged weapons, Luffy might wind up picking up some techniques on how to handle swords and use guns. And the fact that Luffy is still a child wouldn't make Garp go any easier on him, since even in the main story, he put Luffy into some really dangerous situations. Considering how strong Kobe became training under Garp for only 2 years, if Luffy was trained by this guy throughout his entire childhood, he would be an absolute beast. His Conqueror's Haki will be significantly more polished at a young age, and he'd even learn advanced armament Haki a lot quicker. Another important thing is that he would constantly be surrounded by some of the strongest fighters in the world, like Sengoku, Kong, and the Admirals. Kuzan would probably agree to teach the boy a couple of tricks himself out of respect for Garp. At first, Luffy won't see a lot of action during his early training. It's clear that Garp will only give him easy missions to make sure he's ready to face some more serious opponents. These missions would probably see Luffy take on some of the East Blue pirate crews like Arlong pirates or Buggy pirates. These tasks would obviously be pretty easy for him, and he would quickly rise through the ranks, eventually earning the title of a captain. Although the captain is a decent rank within the Marines, Luffy wouldn't stay in that role for long, as his incredible strength and Haki would quickly get him noticed by the higher ups. You see, even people like Smoke Joker or Momonga manage to achieve the Vice Admiral status, and we know for a fact that they aren't all that strong. Considering Luffy's Devil Fruit powers and the hockey training he received from Garp, I can easily see him becoming the youngest Vice Admiral in history. Getting promoted like this would allow Luffy to quickly make a name for himself, with many strong pirates around the world learning about him. Considering his strength, none of the weaker pirates would dare challenge him and would run from the battlefield instantly after seeing him. It's highly likely that he'd even inherit Garp's title as Hero of the Marines by performing various tasks for the world government and helping many innocent people. And although everything is going great for Luffy so far, his life as a Marine isn't going to be that exciting. Think about it. This version of the story likely won't lead up to the Warlord system being dissolved, since Straw Hats aren't there to uncover Doflamingo's plans. Another thing is that Marines aren't allowed to fight the Emperors most of the time. Without both Emperors and Warlords to fight, Luffy's missions would mostly consist of defeating weak pirates or protecting celestial dragons. So in order for Luffy to face off against stronger enemies, I think it's safe to assume that he would join Sword. Joining Sword also seems like something Luffy would like to do, as he would be able to do much more good than before. Still, without his crew, it's highly unlikely Luffy would ever engage an Emperor simply because he wouldn't stand a chance on his own. Some years later, once Luffy is 19, the same age he is post-time skip, he would become the Sword's captain and one of the most influential members alongside Garp. It's likely that he would develop his Haki and Devil Fruit even more during this time, which would make him one of the strongest Marines in the world. However, despite this, he still wouldn't be as strong as his main story self because of this one reason. You see, in the main story, Luffy was constantly fighting many people who were clearly stronger than him, like Doflamingo, Big Mom, or Kaido. These fights pushed his skills to their absolute limits, which allowed him to quickly evolve and adapt his fighting style, Devil Fruit abilities, and Haki. Considering that in this version of the story, Luffy didn't go through all of those near-death experiences, there's just no way he would be as strong as he currently is. He might get stronger eventually if he ever winds up clashing against Emperors of the Sea, but the chance that he'll ever achieve Gear 5 in this scenario is not very big. And finally, let's see what would have happened if Luffy was trained by the world's strongest swordsman, Dracul Mihawk. As unlikely as it would be to happen, if Luffy was trained by Mihawk, there's a high chance he would outclass any other version of himself. I mean, just imagine combining Luffy's Devil Fruit abilities with Mihawk's insane swordsmanship. He would be unstoppable. Luffy's training would start in a similar way as Zoro's in this version of the story. He'll first have to prove himself by defeating the human drills of Gloom Island. Although it'll take him a few months, Luffy will eventually tame the beasts and officially start his training. Mihawk will teach Luffy how to wield a sword properly, everything involved with being a swordsman, and the basics of Haki. Training with swords would mean that Luffy would unlock advanced armament Haki much earlier than expected. Not only that, after sensing Luffy's impressive level of Conqueror's Haki, Mihawk might even go the extra mile and teach his new disciple some truly devastating sword attacks. To put this into perspective, Zoro only spent 2 years with Mihawk and became strong enough to even cut through Kaido's impenetrable skin. So just imagine everything Luffy could achieve. Training with Mihawk would quickly turn Luffy into a fearsome fighter who would possibly be stronger than any of the previous versions we covered. Since Mihawk was a warlord at the time, Luffy will wind up accompanying him on important world government missions, which would give him some real-world experience. It'll also be during one of these missions when Luffy will find a graded blade to call his own. Obviously, this wouldn't be a supreme grade blade or anything crazy like that, but it would definitely be a decent sword, similar to the one Zoro is carrying. Considering Mihawk doesn't like to be ordered around, it's likely that once Luffy gains enough experience, he will wind up executing Mihawk's orders on his own. He'll travel the Grand Line hunting down weaker pirates like Don Krieg or assisting the Marines if needed. With so much traveling up and down the Grand Line, Luffy will pick up a ton of experience very fast and even make a name for himself. After some time, Luffy would meet Shanks and the red-haired pirates while traveling with Mihawk. While his mentor is sparring with Shanks, Luffy might try his chances against Building Snake, who seems to be a swordsman on Shanks' crew. Whether he would be able to actually win this fight, we don't know, but it should be pretty close considering Luffy's skills in this version of the story. Once the government calls all warlords to Marineford, Luffy would accompany Mihawk there as well, where he'd get the chance to fight some of Whitebeard's crew officers like Vista or Jozu. These fights would push Luffy to his limits, but he would also learn a great deal from them. By the time Luffy is the same age as his current self, he would be even stronger than the main story Zoro, since he spent the majority of his life training under Mihawk personally. After learning everything he possibly can from Mihawk, this version of Luffy will make it his mission to challenge as many powerful swordsman as he can find. His journey will eventually lead him to Wano, where he'll learn the origins of the strongest blades in the One Piece world. While there, he would probably challenge some samurai and get his hands on some really powerful, great-grade blades. After traveling the Four Blues and amassing a collection of strong swords, Luffy will make his way back to Mihawk with a blade turned black from the amount of haki imbued into it. Eventually, several years down the line, this version of Luffy can potentially beat Mihawk and become the world's strongest swordsman. Considering how OP haki and swords are in the One Piece world, we can easily assume that this version of Luffy has the potential to clearly be the strongest character in the series, possibly even stronger than the main story self. But did you ever wonder how strong would characters like Roger or Mihawk be if they had devil fruits? Click on this video to find out. It's pretty insane.